This is Focus with Jack Caudill.
Good evening, I'm Jack Caudill. Welcome to this month's edition of Focus. This month we are going back the 10-year anniversary of Winter Storm Atlas, or the big blizzard, or whatever you want to call it, 10 years ago, coming up here later on this week. Three guests with us to talk about that. Susan Sanders, she is the warning coordinating meteorologist with the National Weather Service here in Rapid City. Dustin Willett, he is the Rapid City Pennington County Emergency Management Director. And Vaughn Meyer, he is the president of the South Dakota Stockgrowers Association. Again, talking about whether you call it Winter Storm Atlas or the big blizzard. 10th anniversary of that massive storm is coming up. It all started with rain on October 3rd, 2013. By Friday, October 4th, that had turned to heavy wet snow. That continued on until Saturday, October 5th. By the time it was done, it had dumped up to 58 inches of snow in Bear Ridge west of Spearfish, led to the deaths of thousands of head of livestock. That includes cattle, sheep, horses, and bison, knocked out power in closed roads. Susan, we're going to start with you. Looking back at that, what happened and what were the conditions that led to this big of a storm hitting us here?
Well, the storm track that brought in the precipitation really isn't unusual for fall, and then in the spring, where we call them Colorado lows, the storms form over the southwestern United States, and then they track northeastward into Nebraska and then on to the Great Lakes. And so that brings up a lot of moisture. It's warmer that time of year, so it can hold more moisture than colder air. But at the same time, we had cold air coming down from the north, and it was cold enough to turn that precipitation into snow.
So what made this one so much bigger than what we're used to? And add those other elements in there, the wind and the rain.
Right, very strong, so that causes the strong winds, but not terribly unusual except for that colder air. But in fact, Lead had a similar storm in 1982 in the fall, October 8th, where they actually got more snow from that storm than they did from the 2013 storm. So again, but we didn't have as much cold air at lower levels. That time we only got an inch or two of snow on the plains. But this time the air was colder, and so we had more snow everywhere.
So how much advance warning did you guys have? How much advance notice prediction do you have that this thing was coming?
People shouldn't have been surprised. They may have been skeptical that it was 80 degrees just a couple days before the snow started. So, everybody was out doing summer kind of activities. But on the Tuesday, we started talking about heavy snow, and we put out the watch on Wednesday, and Thursday we were putting out blizzard warnings. And so we gave people notice. And I think what was interesting is that we put that information on social media, and our numbers really spiked. So it was kind of interesting observation that here's a new way of getting information to people.
How unusual, too, you had this giant dumping of snow. A week later, it's pretty much gone.
Well, yeah, in most places, except for the hills, where we had flash flooding about 10 days later.
All right. Dustin Willett was the Emergency Management Director then as well as now. You had only been on the job about a year. What were the big challenges from an infrastructure, from an emergency management perspective when we look at this storm?
So lots of lessons learned. The challenges, facility, that was 1 year prior to moving into the new county administration building. We were down in the basement of the courthouse, so we had some communication challenges, just some basic facility challenges. For an emergency management agency, we weren't very well stocked with food items. We had enough to get by, but it was pretty sparse. Staffing, so the number of people that we had available. We learned one of our lessons was to pay a little more attention to the information coming from our partners at the Weather Service. In addition to the utility companies were taking it very seriously. So the utility companies were mobilizing resources from the eastern side of the state and even surrounding states coming into the area, anticipating some significant power outages. So in hindsight, we probably should have picked up on the fact that there was something significant heading our way. But people, the number of people we had available over that weekend, because transportation infrastructure, because travel was so impacted, the only people we had to work that disaster, that emergency, were the people that we had basically in the building. In that first couple of days, we only had one person from the outside really come into the EOC, and at the time that was Carl Jegeris with the police department, and that's one of the great memories is he snowshoed into the Emergency Operations Center. So I think the biggest challenge was our level of preparation. Even being an emergency management organization, our level of preparation wasn't where it needed to be.
What are the biggest things you guys are dealing with at the start here? Is it people stranded out on the roads? Is it clearing roads? What is the biggest challenge you've got to deal with at that time?
Right, so this storm, like any other storm that we typically have, we start with a closure process. So anytime we have a significant forecast or an actual weather event occurring, a winter weather event occurring, our process starts at about 4 o'clock in the morning, and we're talking with the meteorologists up at the Weather Service, we're talking with County Highway, we're talking with the Sheriff's Office, with County Highway, with Highway Patrol, making some determinations, the school districts, making some determinations on whether or not we're going to recommend closures for city government, county government, those types of things. So those processes started. We were in the office at about 4 o'clock in the morning starting that process. So that was the normal piece, is just working through closures. We're going to have a winter storm. It's going to be impactful. The wind and the drifting, where that transitioned from I hate to use the word typical, but where that transitioned from a typical snowstorm to something that ended up being really impactful was when emergency service vehicles, when our squad cars, when our ambulances, when our fire engines were no longer able to make it around city streets and make it out into the county, when the plows started not being able to keep up with the drifting and the snow accumulation, when vehicles, regardless of type, so when the plows and the emergency response vehicles were not able to get around, that changed the tenor, that changed the feel of the whole event, and we realized that we were in for something significant.
Vaughn Meyer is the president of the South Dakota Stockgrowers Association, and we mentioned the thousands of cattle that were killed and other animals as well. How tough was this on livestock producers, this particular storm?
It was very, very tough on a lot of them. The storm seemed like it focused right here in the Black Hills and moved off to the northeast, and when you get up into some of the areas west of Faith, South Dakota, and in there where there wasn't as much protection, the losses were very severe. Hundreds of head, and that even out east of Sturgis, there was a lot of cattle lost. And there was also the problem, like he mentioned, that some of those cattle had drifted into the highways and that stuff, and trying to get them back the next day, and that was, but it was devastating to a lot of ranchers and that. A lot of young people, I don't know how many, lost their livelihood because of that or not, but it really took a toll on some of the older people too. Not just physically, but mentally. Mentally was one of the big issues, and our executive director, Sylvia Christian, at the time, she got a hold of the governor's office and said, this is bigger than you think out here, and we better get out here and take a tour of this area. And of course the National Guard and some of the others brought them out, and flew the area on there. But afterwards, she tried to host meetings to get people together. There was people that hosted suppers in some of the smaller towns and stuff like that to pull people together, because the mental strain on people was extreme on there.
What made this storm, I've heard this described as almost the perfect storm as far as danger for cattle, with the rain and then the cold and the snow. What was it that all came together to make this one so bad?
Well, at our place, we're fall calvers instead of spring, so we had a lot of young calves. But those cows, a week before, one of the things we fight in fall calving is the heat. We'd been fighting the extreme heat. As she mentioned, it was 80 degrees and plus. And cattle were not haired up yet for winter. It hit, and then of course we had the rain for a day and a half. I think we had about 1 3/4 inches of rain that morning before I left home, even before it changed to snow on there. So it was chilled down a lot of those animals, and then of course the snow hit and they started drifting in that. So it was extreme because of the lack of hair growth for winter on the animals.
All right, we got to take a break. We'll continue our look at Winter Storm Atlas when we continue with this month's edition of Focus. And I'm Jack Caudill. Welcome back to this month's edition of Focus, talking about Winter Storm Atlas. The 10th anniversary happened in October of 2013. Dustin Willis is the Emergency Management Director for Rapid City in Pennington County. As we mentioned earlier, the snow, at least here in town, melted away fairly quickly, but recovery took a lot longer than that. What all went into that? We're talking about clearing trees, clearing roads, clearing all of that kind of stuff, getting power restored. What went into that whole process?
Yeah, so 30,000 plus customers without power at the peak of Atlas, and I think the last customer had their power restored almost 18 days after the storm hit. So prolonged power outages. The weather, the temperatures recovered very, very quickly that next week. So we went from not being able to move on our roads to dealing with some flooding issues due to the melt, the runoff of the snow. The recovery took years. I think the last piece of paper that my office signed on the 2013 event was 2016, 2017. So years worth of tracking and paperwork and processes during recovery. The livestock, the livestock that was lost, we did our best to be a partner to the agricultural community to help with some of that, with the disposal of carcasses. The vegetative debris was certainly the most, in terms of cost to the municipalities, in terms of actual cost to city government, county government, the debris removal was in the multiple millions of dollars. Again, the leaves were still on the trees, heavy wet snow. As folks that were here remember, there was just vegetative debris, branches down everywhere. So those were the livestock carcasses, and the vegetative debris, the tree branches, were the most significant long-term recovery pieces.
So how do you deal with that much vegetation down, that many tree limbs, that many trees, bushes, all that kind of stuff?
So similar to operations during the event, and then certainly during recovery, it takes a village is the term that comes to mind. Everybody stepped up. Everybody had a part. Mentioned the state assistance from the National Guard, South Dakota Wildland Fire, the U.S. Forest Service, County Highway, all of the parks and recreation folks, the utility departments, the street departments from all of our municipalities within Pennington County, the Pennington County departments. Everybody was pitching in. The tough part is formulating a plan, communicating that plan to the public, and then certainly executing, but figuring out where we can take all that stuff, figuring out how we're going to take all that stuff, and then the reimbursement piece. So when you get into disasters at a level where FEMA comes to town, you have to start tracking all of those costs and all of those processes from the very, very onset. And so there was a huge administrative task. In fact, the city of Rapid City, who was impacted the most significantly with, or had the largest impact from vegetative debris, brought in a private contractor, and all that contractor does is go around to these types of storms and hurricanes and does debris management to FEMA standards for municipalities. That's what they do. And so we brought in some specialty contractors to help us with that.
All right. Vaughn Meyer is the president of the South Dakota Stockgrowers Association. How did this storm affect the cattle industry in the long term?
Well, it brought the numbers down for the producers that lost on there, and it takes years to rebuild those numbers on the long term. The only good thing I can say about the storm was the next year's hay crop, because of all that moisture that went into the ground, was probably the best hay crop we've ever witnessed in there. You know, we had like 42 inches of snow, I guess, on the level, and it was just as blue as ice, you know, like in an iceberg. So it was unusual from that deal. But like even on our place, there was a lot of structure loss. There was, you know, all steel structures that the weight of that snow crushed on there. I believe we lost 4 sheds in there, and a lot of other people did too. like in Sturgis here, South Dakota, it's Runnings now, but they lost their store, and there was probably other buildings within Sturgis too that had trouble. It was a hard hit too there, on there. But it takes years to rebuild on a cow herd. You don't just go back out and, unless you can find good open heifers. A lot of people have their own genetic program, and they kind of like to use those genetics and not reach outside of their herd on there. And of course, you got to have a banker that's going to work with you on that too. As a unexpected loss. Some people had insurance on them, and some didn't. And that was one of the main issues I heard on several cases was, did those cattle, the insurance covered the animals if they drowned? Well, a lot of those cattle did drown in that storm because of the moisture they breathed into their lungs is what happened, and that was quite an issue there.
How much did things like the Ranchers Relief Fund help out? And what did that do for you, seeing that many people come together to help out that way?
It was very helpful on there, yes, and of course your county, I call them ASC offices. They came out with a program to reimburse people on a lot of those dead cattle. But probably the biggest thing was the local events that they had to bring people together, so that they could share their stories and open up. A lot of people didn't. When you're hit that hard, like in my case too, I was caught off the ranch, and we knew she had warned us that it was coming, but we just thought this early it can't come, and on there, so we felt guilty. There was a guilty feeling in there, and a lot of people didn't want to open up and talk about it, and those community events like that really helped out a lot.
Susan, what are the chances? Is something like this going to happen again?
Well, eventually it could. We've had some other blizzards since then. If you remember the 2019 in March, it was kind of a similar storm, the bomb cyclone that caused flooding, serious flooding in Nebraska and eastern South Dakota, and we had the heavy snow. So every few years we have a blizzard. Sometimes it hits other places, not the same place all the time. We had the big blizzard in December this year. That was a long-lasting blizzard, colder season, so it's a little bit different, but that had strong winds with a lot of drifting, and then of course the winds picked up a couple days later and we had more drifting and whiteout conditions, and so that impacted a lot of people as well, and that snow lasted a long time. It didn't melt very quickly, and so this is something that people need to expect in this area, that we're going to have blizzards and winter storms like this.
You live here, it's going to happen.
It's going to happen.
All right.
Hopefully this is the one of our generation. People still talk about the 1949 blizzard, and probably 1966 was the other really big, remarkable one, and then 2013.
All right, we got to take another break. We'll continue our look at Winter Storm Atlas when we continue with this month's edition of Focus. I'm Jack Caudill. Welcome back to this month's edition of Focus, talking about the 10-year anniversary of Winter Storm Atlas here in the Black Hills. Susan Sanders is the warning coordinating meteorologist for the National Weather Service. What kind of challenges do big storms like this pose for meteorologists?
Well, we try to provide as much advance notice as possible to people. And so monitoring the track of the storm, the specific conditions like the temperatures, what's the weather going to be? Is it going to be rain or snow or a mix? And so as we get better technology, more sophisticated computers, our models are getting more refined and more detailed. And so we have more confidence in what they're showing us. Sometimes there is some variation. We think, okay, the storm's going to go here, and then sometimes it kind of takes a step back and does something else. Like we see very commonly with the hurricane forecasts, where sometimes those change too. But as we get better information, more detailed information, we've got much better satellites than we do now. Of course, we're seeing our Doppler radar that we've used for almost 30 years, and that provides us information as that storm is almost on us. But we have the network where we can see a mosaic of radar systems. But we're monitoring that all the time. We have a lot more data, so that really helps us in seeing what's happening and what's going to be happening.
All right, Dustin Willett is the Emergency Management Director for Rapid City and Pennington County. Dustin, what did you guys learn from that storm, and are you better prepared this time? than you were from last time?
We would need a lot more time to go down the list of what we learned. And the short answer to the second question, part of that question, is an emphatic yes. We are absolutely better prepared than we were in 2013 as an organization, as a community, with some of our partnerships and relationships. It really was a seminal event in my career as an emergency manager. Learned a lot, and probably some of those key takeaways are government organizations aren't the answer in large-scale disasters. We just don't have the people, the resources. It really brought home the importance of community, and FEMA's doctrine is whole community. Every part of the community, every family, every school, every church, every private business. It takes the entire community. We had 38 snowmobilers that were helping us during that weekend. The Black Hills Snowmobile Club, the Amateur Radio Club, all those civic organizations that exist in the community. I don't think I had talked to Sylvia with the Stockgrowers Association for more than 2 sentences prior to October 2013, and certainly had a lot more lengthy conversations afterwards. So again, just the relationships and how important it is to build those networks throughout the whole community to deal with things that impact the community like this.
Vaughn Meyer is the president of the South Dakota Stockgrowers Association. Vaughn, what did ranchers learn through all of this? And are they doing anything differently now than they were 10 years ago if something like this is on the way?
I think the main thing is the ranchers are paying more attention to, like Susan said, the alerts and the warnings that are out there, and not only on the radio but on Facebook and that, and so the word's out there and they're watching. A lot of structures, windbreaks and stuff have been put up for people. In our case, on our place, we put up several structures since, which came in handy back in the December storms that we had last year, as far as small calves being able to get out of it and that, because that was a very cold one versus the one that we had there in 2013 on there, which was extreme on them. But probably better equipment. Most ranchers are running front assist tractors and stuff like that now because, you know, it's expensive, but a loss like that is, you can prevent a lot of it on there. I guess that's pretty well covers what they're doing. Hopefully, generators, you know, being out of power that long, a lot of people have put in generators and that sort of things for power.
Now, in an industry that is so dependent on the weather, I mean, you're out there and that is the lifeblood of what's going to happen with the weather. Is it something that you guys accept to some extent, that you're going to have your highs and lows when it comes to weather?
Oh yeah, most definitely. You know, we just there's people in places like where the shelter's better that just take a loss every year, figure a loss every 10 years maybe roughly, and a lot of good years, you know, in between, and rather than building structures and that. But when you get out away from the hills and other places like in Montana and Wyoming, they're putting up windbreaks and doing what they can and try to limit the amount of loss on that. And the other thing is your animal husbandry. Are you doing all you can to keep those livestock comfortable and that, you know? A lot of that livestock is like family to most of the people out there.
All right, we are just about out of time. And Susan, nothing like this on the horizon immediately right now?
Well, the next few days anyway.
Okay.
So we'll keep an eye on things.
All right, looking good for now. Susan Sanders, Dustin Willett, Vaughn Meyer, thank you for joining us, and thank you for joining us, and hope to see you again the first Sunday night of next month for another edition of Focus.